So a sociologist and a lawyer have been given 5 minutes total to speak about Mr. Stevenson, and I'm going to try and do that. The only way I could be even close to as excited to introduce Mr. Stevenson is if Johnny Bench was here, my hero as a child. Like activists in the Innocence Network, Mr. Stevenson took on the daunting task of speaking and acting on behalf of the poor and condemned. On a shoestring, he founded the Equal Justice Institute, an organization dedicated to systemic improvement and unwavering advocacy for the voiceless who are all too frequently misrepresented by the lawyers, mistreated by police and prosecutors, and condemned to interminable sentences, including death. He is fought, and he is sacrificed, and all the while remaining humble, classy, and focused, but never fevered. Mr. Stevenson is dedicated to transparency and an impassioned commitment to justice and fairness. He once said that, quote, "The opposite of poverty is not wealth. In too many places, the opposite of poverty is justice." He not only speaks truth to power, but he actively seeks to upset it. Bryan Stevenson has become a symbol of righteousness in the face of injustice for the marginalized and forgotten. He has risen to this status by being able to translate his intellectual training and adjudication experiences into understandable discourse in a way that speaks to the hearts of every American, regardless of education or intellectual ability. He does precisely what a public intellectual strives to do, to be understood by as wide an audience as possible, to reach deep into their hearts and minds, and to penetrate the core of goodness and righteousness that lies in each of us. To awaken the spirit of justice and empowerment so that we can all join in the struggle for equity and due process. This can only happen if one understands that the criminal justice system is designed to reproduce the interests of the powerful. Bryan Stevenson understands this, and he's adept at speaking about it with intelligence, forcefulness, humility, and compassion. Mr. Stevenson's scholarship and legal activism demonstrate his awareness of the political, economic, and cultural embeddedness constituting all human beings as subjects in a complex web of relationships. The force of his work is his ability to expose class and race-ethnic marginalization, leading to maltreatment by the criminal justice system. On more than one occasion, I've read or heard Mr. Stevenson say that, quote, "No one of us is as bad as the worst thing we've done," close quote. We truly are our brother's keeper, and Mr. Stevenson understands and exemplifies this in ways that are truly inspirational. It is my great honor to have nominated Mr. Bryan Stevenson for the 2015 Innocence Network Champion of Justice Award, and an even greater honor to be able to publicly express my gratitude in his presence. Bryan Stevenson is a most deserving recipient of the Innocence Network's Champion of Justice Award. Thank you.
Stuff I was going to say about how everybody ought to buy your book. Because love is the motive, but justice is the instrument. But I'm just going to defer to Bryan, who we all know is a great friend to all of us and a really inspirational figure. And the only thing that I regret, but we are indebted to you for, I know, interrupting your busy schedule and coming here at the last minute and doing this for us. Yesterday, when 155 people came to this stage, exonerees, including Anthony Hinton, your latest client exonerated from death row, you know, I couldn't help but think about 1998 at Northwestern, where all that power was in the room and you inspired us so much with the talk you gave then. but to see these 150 people up here all talking about forgiveness and the spiritual power of that is really extraordinary. And when you read Bryan's book, and you should, it's called Just Mercy, and the spine of it is really his discussion of his client, Walter McMillan. Yeah. And all of you, and that's a man that Bryan was able to exonerate off death row in Mississippi, Alabama, and then became his close friend until his death. And he describes in his book, chapter, that's really the spine of the book, his relationship with Walter, what it was like when Walter got out, his struggles, what he learned from Walter, his ability to forgive his accusers and those who showed him no mercy. And it really is something that would resonate with every exoneree in this room and resonate with everybody here that helped get people out of prison who didn't commit the crime. So I feel like your agent. You don't need it, but really for this group, read this book, it's just wonderful.
Well, first of all, I just want to say to Rob, to all of you who felt led to give me this award, I'm deeply, deeply honored. I have such respect for the work that everyone in the Innocence Network does. But I'll tell you something, I've actually gotten a fair amount of awards along the way. And usually when someone gives me an award, you know, I go and I get it. And I'm always grateful, deeply, deeply grateful, but I don't really think about it very much. I was in Baltimore yesterday, and I was in Miami this morning to give a talk, and driving up here to Orlando, I started thinking about this. And I think maybe for the first time, I'm getting an award that means something to me, not because of what I've done, but I'm getting it in a room with one of my heroes. And 3 weeks ago, I walked out of Birmingham jail with an extraordinary man who had been wrongly convicted and spent 30 years on Alabama's death row. 30 years. He was locked in solitary confinement in a 5-by-7 cell. They tried to kill him every day, every month, every year. He witnessed 53 executions. He's talked about smelling flesh burning during the early years when people were electrocuted. But despite all of that, he was someone who had a hope and a conviction that he would be free. And I've never represented anyone who generated the kind of goodwill and compassion and concern among correctional staff. More than this man. I could go down there to see my client. I couldn't get into prison without guards stopping me, asking me, when are you going to get him out? I couldn't get out without them asking me, well, did you figure something out? When are you going to get him out? And his witness and his hope and ultimately his release has changed things for me. What it's changed for me is this recognition that champions aren't made by the things they say. They're not made by the accomplishments they make. Champions are made by the orientation, the spirit they bring to the work that they do. And I don't really want to accept this award, but I do want to acknowledge it and offer it to my friend and my hero, who I cannot tell you what it means to me to walk into this space and see him here among us. And Ray, I just want to say I love you. And I'm deeply moved to see you here this afternoon. Thank you so much. So I think we've got some great opportunities to really change the world. And I say that with all earnestness. I believe that our ability to reform America's criminal justice system is at the really top of the list of things that are necessary if we're going to change the world. We're going to create more justice in the world. We're going to create progress in the world, because we cannot advance justice. We can't claim to make progress while what we have done over the last 4 decades continues. What we've done in this country over the last 4 decades is absolutely horrific. Horrific. And it's not just what we've done to people who are innocent and wrongly convicted. It's what we've done to millions of people. You all know these data. The prison population in 1972 was 300,000. Today, it's 2.3 million. That the United States has the highest rate of incarceration in the world, and we're not ashamed of it, says something really critical about where we are in this country. The fact that there are 6 million people on probation and parole, the fact that there are 70 million Americans with criminal arrests, which means that when they apply for a job, if they apply for a loan, they have enormous barriers of getting hired, of getting money. I was in Baltimore yesterday because I'm deeply concerned about the way in which mass incarceration has ravaged poor communities and communities of color. We have too many children in our country that are born into violent families. They live in violent neighborhoods. They go to violent schools, and they're chased by violent gangs. By the age of 5 or 6, they've been traumatized by violence. And they're hypervigilant. They're always worried about what the bad thing is going to happen to them. And of course, when you're living like that, when you're terrified all the time, when you've got violence all around you, joining a gang is a very rational thing to do. And of course, their lives being constrained and forced and pushed in this way, ultimately, they act violently, and that tends to be when we intervene, and we threaten them, and we accuse them of being horrific people, we call them names. And I'm persuaded that until we acknowledge that justice requires more than that, we won't be able to change the world. The Bureau of Justice now reports that 1 in 3 black male babies born in this country is expected to go to jail or prison during his lifetime. 1 in 3. That was not true when any of us were born in the 20th century. It wasn't true in the 19th century. It became true in the 21st century. And why we're not all outraged and adamant and vocal about that speaks to the reason why I think we have to change the world. And nothing gets the attention of this country more than when we expose the excess of mass incarceration, when we expose the excess of mass incarceration by fighting for people who are wrongly convicted. Because their stories, their lives animate an even bigger lie about human nature, about human fallibility. And so I think the work that the network is doing is not only critical, but it's essential if we are trying to change the world. And I just have 4 things I want to share with you before you head on home and go about your work. And I've learned them over the years. And the first is that as we do this work, it is critically important that we stay proximate to the clients and the communities where our clients come from. You cannot do effective advocacy. You can't talk about what it means to stand for people who have been wrongly convicted from a distance. You've got to be close to the people you're representing. You've got to be close to the people you care about. The people who have been exonerated know that their survival was dependent on someone staying proximate to them. Proximity is what allows you to do the difficult things that other people think can't be done. And it's important that we appreciate that. And not only is it important that we stay proximate to our clients when they're released and when they're exonerated, and our clients when we're fighting for them in jails and prisons, it's important that we stay proximate to the communities where mass incarceration have ravaged so many lives. You know, we're told that if you see a problem over there, you've got to go the opposite direction. If you know you've got bad schools in the community, you don't want to go there. You know if there are bad parts of town where there's a lot of despair and anger, you need to stay away from that. But someone actually has to go to those bad schools. Someone has to go to the bad part of town. Someone has to get close to the people who are suffering and struggling. I have conversations with young kids in projects, and these kids will sometimes really be very honest with me. And the hardest thing for me to hear is when I talk to these 13 and 14-year-old children who tell me, they'll say, Mr. Stevenson, I know I'm not going to be free or alive by the time I'm 21. And they don't say that because of something they've seen on TV. They say that because that's what they're experiencing in their neighborhoods. They see their friends and their neighbors and their siblings dying or effectively dying by being sent to prison. And this despair is so pervasive. And we will not overcome it until we get close to those kids and we start holding them and trying to teach them that maybe there's another way. Proximity, I am persuaded, is essential. I'm a product of someone else's choice to get proximate. I don't have any problem telling you that I started my education in a public school. I grew up in a community where black children couldn't go to the public schools. When I was a little boy, I had to go to the colored school. And lawyers came into our community and made them open up the public school. And but for those lawyers' choice to get proximate, I wouldn't be standing here. I'm not confused about how I got here. I got here on the backs of people who chose to be proximate. Because I got to go to the public school, I could go to high school. There was no high school for black kids in my county. But I got to go to high school, and after graduating from high school, I got to go to college. I loved college. I'll just be honest, I thought college was the best thing. I was from a musical family, so I got to do music in college. I played sports coming up, so I got to do sports. And I just really went to a beautiful campus in Pennsylvania, and all this acreage and rivers and streams, and I thought college was just the best. I wanted college to last forever. And I was majoring in philosophy, and I just thought it was the best. And I would sometimes say to my friends, you know, I'm going to go out and do some philosophy, y'all. I realize now that they probably thought I was saying I was going to do drugs or something. But I wasn't. I would actually go out and sit on the hillside, and I would think what I thought were these great, deep thoughts. And one day, during my senior year, somebody came up to me and said, well, what are you going to do after you graduate from college? And I heard it as a really hostile question because I never thought about the fact that nobody was going to pay me to philosophize when I graduated from college. And I didn't know something that perhaps all of you all probably knew. I didn't know that if you want to do graduate work in history or political science and English as a way of extending your education in America, you actually have to know something about history or political science. So I was really worried about that, a little discouraged by that. So I kept looking, and to be honest, that's how I found law school. It was pretty clear to me you didn't need to know anything to go to law school. A few months later, I found myself at Harvard Law School, sitting in the classroom, and I was persuaded I made a terrible mistake. I went to law school because I was interested in talking about racial justice. I wanted to talk about poverty. I wanted to talk about justice, and it didn't seem like anybody was talking about race. Nobody was talking about poverty. It didn't even seem like anybody was talking about justice. And I decided I was going to leave the law school because it just wasn't engaging me. And I went to the School of Public Policy, and 2 months into my first year there, I woke up one morning and I thought, man, I'm even more miserable here than I was at the law school. They were teaching us to maximize benefits and minimize costs, but it didn't seem to matter whose benefits got maximized and whose costs got minimized. And that disconnect was alienating to me, and I was trying to reconcile myself as a life, as a lawyer, that I knew was not going to be fully engaging. Until I took a course that sent me to the Deep South. I worked with Steve Wright and this group of lawyers who were representing people on death row. And it's that proximity that changed everything for me. Steve asked me to go down to death row and meet a man who they hadn't had time to meet. And I said, okay, and I was really excited about it. And I got in the car and I drove down. I was very nervous because I was just a law student. I didn't think I knew enough to be talking to a death row prisoner. I'd never been to death row before. And I got to the prison in Jackson, Georgia, and I walked inside. It was very intimidating. And all of a sudden, I really got nervous. And they took me to the visitation room, and I was in this visitation room waiting for this client to come out. And I kept pacing back and forth, and finally they opened the door, and there stood on the other side of the door this man who was weighed down with chains. He had handcuffs on his wrists, he had a chain around his waist, he had shackles on his ankles. I looked at him and I just thought how burdened he must feel with all these chains. It took them 10 minutes to get the chains off, and finally when they unchained him, he walked inside, and I walked up to him and I said, I just want to say I'm so sorry. I'm just a law student. I don't know much about the death penalty. I don't know much about habeas corpus. I don't know much about the appeals process. I don't know much about criminal law. I don't know much about criminal procedure. But they sent me down here to tell you that you're not at risk of execution anytime in the next year. And when I said that, the man said, wait. Say that again. I said, you're not at risk of execution anytime in the next year. And the man grabbed my hands and he said, wait, say that again. I said, you're not at risk of execution anytime in the next year. I couldn't believe it. And then he looked at me and he said, I can't tell you how glad I am you're here. He said, this means the world to me. He said, you're the first person I've met in 2 years on death row who's not a death row prisoner or a death row guard. He said, I've been talking to my wife and my children over the telephone, but I haven't let them come and visit because I was afraid I'd have an execution date and I didn't want them to have to deal with it. He said, now I'm going to see my wife, now I'm going to see my children. I couldn't believe it. We sat down and started talking. It turned out we had exactly the same birthday, the same month, same day, same week. And even though I'd only scheduled to be there an hour turned into 2 hours, 2 hours turned into 3 hours, we were still talking. And after 3 hours, the guards got angry and they came bursting into the room, and they were frustrated at me, but they couldn't do anything to me, so they took it out on this man, and they threw him against the wall, and they put the handcuffs on him really tightly. And I watched him grimacing and trying to get the officers to stop, but they ignored me. And then they wrapped the chain around his waist, and I saw them pushing him very roughly. I tried to get them to stop, but they ignored me. And the man looked at me and said, "Bryan, don't you worry about this, you just come back." And then they put the shackles on his ankles, and I could see him grimacing because they put them on so tightly. And then they pushed him roughly toward the door. He almost fell down. And I tried to get them to stop, but they paid me no mind. And the man looked at me again. He said, "Bryan, don't you worry about this, just come back." And then I kept watching while they shoved this man so roughly. They were about to push him out of the door, but before they pushed him out of the door, I watched him plant his feet for the next shove. And when they got him in front of the door and they tried to push him out of the door, he didn't move. And then this man looked at me, and he looked over and he said, "Bryan, don't you worry about this, you just come back." And then this man did something I've never, ever forgotten. He looked at me, he closed his eyes, he threw his head back, and he began to sing. And he started singing this hymn I used to hear all the time when I was a kid growing up. He started singing, "I'm pressing on the upward way. New heights I'm gaining every day, still praying as I'm onward bound. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground." Everybody stopped. And then the guards recovered and started pushing him down the hallway. You could hear these chains climbing as they were pushing him down the hallway, but you could hear him singing about higher ground. I will tell you that his song changed me. In a moment, I knew that I wanted to help condemned people get to higher ground. More than that, I knew that my journey to higher ground was tied to his journey. I went back to Harvard Law School, and you couldn't get me out of the law school either. I needed to know everything about civil procedure and criminal procedure and constitutional law and comedy and federalism and habeas corpus and constitutional principles, because I knew that that knowledge was going to help condemned people get to higher ground. Proximity is something you need to do to change the world, but I will tell you that it will change you too. It will make you understand the power that you have to be a witness, to be an advocate, to shape things, to push things, to turn things around. A power you need to claim if we're going to change the world. The second thing that I believe we have to embrace as we begin and push and move forward on this journey, I believe we've got to understand the importance of changing the narrative. You see, there have never been more innocent people wrongly convicted in jails and prisons than there are right now. Despite all of our work, the numbers are through the roof. We had 300,000 people in jails and prisons in 72. We have 2.3 million today. How can it be anything else but thousands of people who are wrongly convicted? And yet there is this indifference. And so we've got to change the narrative that sustains indifference to wrongful convictions. The narrative is key to our success. You see, I believe mass incarceration has been sustained by the politics of fear and anger. We've had politicians competing with each other over who can be toughest on crime. And when you have people behaving like that in an electoral political dynamic, they're going to be indifferent to the innocent. They're going to be indifferent to evidence. They're going to be indifferent to whether the science is reliable or fair. That narrative is going to create cruelty and injustice, and we've got to change the narrative. Not only do we have to hold people accountable, we've got to call people out if we hear them talking with the politics of fear and anger. We can't tolerate it anywhere in our system. Not just for the people who are wrongly convicted, but for everybody. It's just that corrupted. I've seen it with children. My work recently has been focusing on children prosecuted as adults, and it pains me to see what we've done to children in this country. We now have 250,000 people serving long prison sentences for crimes they committed as children. 10,000 children in adult jails and prisons, 3,000 children sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. And the narrative behind it is what's so destructive. We demonize these kids. We say they're super predators. We call them names. We call them all of these things, and it makes us comfortable. That narrative has to change. I was working on a case several years ago about a 14-year-old boy who was living in a house where his mother was repeatedly the target of a lot of domestic violence. This boy's mother had a boyfriend who would start drinking. When the man started drinking, he would get very violent. And one day he'd been drinking, he came home, he walked into the kitchen, he called the boy's mother into the kitchen. And he didn't say anything to her, just went up to her and punched her in the face. She hit her head as she fell down, and she was on the floor bleeding. And her child came running in there, this little boy, and tried to help his mom recover, helped her try to revive him. He couldn't get his mother to stir, he couldn't get her to wake up, and she was covered with blood, and this child thought his mom was dead. The man had gone into a bedroom and fallen asleep, and so the little boy got up and he walked into the bedroom where he knew this man kept a handgun. And he reached into this dresser drawer and he pulled out this handgun and he walked over to where the man was sleeping. And then the boy stood there pointing the gun at the man's head, and the man was snoring, but when the man stopped snoring, this child pulled the trigger, tragically. Shot the man in the head, the man died almost instantly. This kid was about 5 feet tall, he weighed under 100 pounds, he was not been in trouble before, he had no juvenile adjudications, he was a decent student, he was the kind of kid that might have been tried as a juvenile, but for the fact that the man that he shot and killed, his mother's boyfriend, well, that man was a deputy sheriff. And because he was a deputy sheriff, the prosecutor insisted that this child be tried as an adult. And they immediately certified him to stand trial as an adult, and they put him in the adult jail. He'd been there for 3 days before I got involved, and his grandmother asked me to go and see him. And I went to the jail, and I sat down, and I waited and watched while this little boy walked out. And I couldn't believe how small he was. And he sat down and started asking him questions, but he wouldn't respond to any of the questions that I asked. I kept trying to get him to talk. I said, look, I can't help you if you don't talk. You got to talk to me. He wouldn't say a word. And finally, I put my pen down and I said, look, I can't help you if you don't talk. You got to come and talk to me. And he wouldn't say anything. So I got up and I walked around the table. I pulled my chair close to him. I said, come on, you got to talk to me. I can't help you if you don't talk to me. He kept staring at the wall. And I didn't know what to do, and there was a moment there I couldn't figure out what to do, and so I just started leaning on him. And I leaned on this little boy until I felt him lean back, and when he leaned back, I put my arm around him. And I said, come on, you got to talk to me. I can't help you if you don't talk to me. And when I did that, this little boy started to cry. And through his tears, he began talking to me, not about what happened with his mom. He didn't start talking about what had happened with the man. He started talking to me about what had happened at the jail. He told me on the first night several men had hurt him. He told me on the next night he had been raped by several people. He told me on the night before I got there, so many people had hurt him, he couldn't remember how many there had been. And I held this little boy while he cried hysterically for almost an hour. I said, look, I'm going to get you out of here. And I was trying to leave, and he was grabbing onto me, begging me not to leave. I said, no, I'm going to come back. And I left that jail, and when I left the jail, the question I had in my mind was, who is responsible for this? And the answer is, we are.
Absolutely.
We've allowed this narrative about children to emerge. We've allowed policies to develop and fester and corrupt and corrode our society and our sensitivities, and we are still tolerating putting children in adult jails and prisons. That narrative is the enemy, and we are complicit until we change the narrative. I believe all children are children. The violent ones, the guilty ones, the dark ones, the light ones, all children are children. And when a society gives up on its children, it sows the seeds of a corrupt, unjust society. And so we've got to change that narrative. I believe we have to change the narrative about race. We've never really confronted our history of racial inequality.
Absolutely.
You want to know why so many of the exonerated and wrongly convicted are people of color? It's because there's this presumption of dangerousness and guilt that follows black and brown people around every day of their life. Every day. And that presumption of dangerousness is rooted in a narrative of racial difference that we haven't confronted ever. And so I think we've got to change the narrative. We've got to start talking about our history of racial inequality. I believe we actually have to start talking about slavery.
Absolutely.
We're in a slave state, Florida. And that history is everywhere. It creates shadows and little echoes, and it creates problems that we have all inherited. So most people think that slavery was about involuntary servitude. I don't believe that the great evil of American slavery was forced labor. I believe the great evil of American slavery was white supremacy, the ideology that we created that suggested that these black people, these people of color, were somehow deficit, that they're not fully human, that they're not as smart as everybody else, they're not as hardworking, they're dangerous, and that narrative of racial difference, that was the great evil of American slavery. And the 13th Amendment didn't deal with the narrative. The Emancipation Proclamation didn't deal with the narrative. The narrative didn't actually ever get addressed, and it's why I argue that slavery didn't end in 1865. I believe slavery didn't end, I just believe it evolved. It turned into decades of terrorism and violence and subordination. We just put out a report about lynching in America. We documented 4,000 lynchings in 12 states, which is what we did in this country. During those 80 years was nothing short of horrific terrorism. People get upset and angry when they hear about these beatings and atrocities in the Mideast, ISIS, but we did the same thing to people of color, to traumatize and terrorize them. Older people come up to me, they say, Mr. Stevenson, I get so angry when I hear somebody on TV talking about how we're dealing with terrorism for the first time in our nation's history after 9/11. They said, we grew up with terrorism. We were bombed and threatened and lynched our whole lives. And that terror shaped our country. And the politics of our country can still be seen. People, I have these students in the North, and I go up there, and people think like they're from someplace else. But 90% of the African-American population in 1900 was in the Deep South. Black people went to Cleveland and Chicago and Detroit and Los Angeles and Oakland and Boston, not as immigrants looking for opportunities, but as refugees from terror. If you know anything about international human rights, you know that you cannot help a refugee community until you talk about the trauma that has given rise to their exodus. We've got to change the narrative. I get frustrated because I live in Alabama, and we love talking about mid-19th century history in Alabama. We love it. We just don't like talking about the parts of it that deal with our mistakes. This past Monday was Confederate Memorial Day in Alabama, state holiday. Jefferson Davis's birthday is a state holiday. And we don't even have Martin Luther King Day in Alabama. It's Martin Luther King / Robert E. Lee Day. And we don't talk about this. I even am worried about our civil rights conversations, to be honest. I'm glad that we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of all these things, but I'm worried because we're so superficial, even when we talk about civil rights. Everybody gets to celebrate civil rights. You say the word civil rights and people just start applauding. Everybody gets to participate. We don't ask any qualifying questions. We don't ask anything. And I hear people talking about the civil rights movement, and it sounds like this 3-day carnival. On day 1, Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat on the bus. On day 2, Dr. King led a march on Washington. And on day 3, we changed all these laws. And if that was the civil rights movement, man, we are an amazing country. That's not what civil rights was about. That's not our history. Our history is that for decades, we humiliated black people in this country. For decades, we've excluded and belittled and marginalized and injured and battered and beat down people of color in this country. We did it for decades. My parents were humiliated every day of their lives. Couldn't go into town, couldn't go to the places they wanted to go. And you don't fix that kind of injury, that kind of trauma, by just signing a law. We've got to commit ourselves to truth and reconciliation. We need it. We didn't do it in the 1960s, we didn't do it in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s, we've never done it. And because of that, this presumption of dangerousness and guilt has put many of the people in this room behind bars, sometimes for decades, for things that they did not do. We cannot disconnect that reality. You go to South Africa, and they will tell you that they couldn't make progress after apartheid without truth and reconciliation. You go to Rwanda, they will tell you that they won't recover from the genocide without truth and reconciliation. In Germany today, you can't go to Berlin without encountering markers and monuments and stones dedicated to the families of Jewish victims who were taken to the concentration camps. They want you to go to the camps and reflect soberly on the history of Holocaust. In this country, we do the opposite. You say race and people get nervous. You say racial justice, they get really nervous. You can't have the conversations, and we have to change that narrative. We have on our website a bunch of materials. I invite you all to go to the website. We'll send them to you at no cost. We're producing calendars and reports and documents aimed at trying to change the narrative. I want to put markers and monuments at every lynching site in this country. And when we most wrongful convictions are rooted in an absence of humility. They're rooted in arrogance. And we like to cover our courthouses with all of these emblems that are arrogant, and lynching monuments and markers are designed to make us create some humility about who we are in the states we live in. Third thing, I don't believe we can change the world by just getting proximate and changing the narrative. I also believe that we've got to stay hopeful. The exonerated in this room know something about hope. They know that they could have failed, they could have fallen down. They had every reason to get hopeless. Many of them couldn't find the legal help they needed for years. Many of them had to go through case after case after case being denied and rejected. Many of them had to endure conditions of confinement that were heartbreaking and devastating. Many of them saw family and loved ones move away and simply start to forget about them. And yet they could not succeed. They could not triumph without holding on to their hope. And their witness is the example we have to embrace. We can't change the world. We can't free the wrongly convicted. We can't create greater justice until we protect our hopefulness. And when you feel yourself getting hopeless about what you can do, you need to do something to reorient, because your hope is essential. I believe in justice prevails where hopelessness persists. I've been into too many courtrooms where I see a hopeless judge, a hopeless prosecutor, a hopeless defense attorney, and a hopeless client, and I know there's not going to be any justice in that court. Our hope is what shapes us. It's what gives us the power, the will to stand when other people are sitting, to speak when other people are quiet. And sometimes we just need to identify the things that make us hopeless. That's what I've been trying to do, is to figure out those things that are going to threaten my hope dynamic. And I'll be honest, one of the things that gets to me, and this is the problem with living in Montgomery, Alabama, I will tell you that I get challenged when I hear people talking about the good old days. I don't like the way we glorify the old South. I don't like the way we romanticize the 19th century. I don't like it. I don't like the Confederate flags. Don't like it. Don't like hearing people talking about the good old days. It provokes me. I was going to a prison some years ago, and I was parking my car, and there was a truck outside this prison, and this truck was like a shrine to the Old South. It had all of these Confederate flags on it. It had the gun rack. It had these bumper stickers. There were actually bumper stickers on this truck I hadn't seen before. One of these bumper stickers read, quote, "If I'd known it was going to be like this, I'd pick my own car." I hadn't seen that one before. I went past this truck, and I went up to the door. There was a white guard at the door. When I got there, I said, "Hi, my name is Bryan Stevenson. I'm here for a legal visit." And the man looked at me and he said, "You're not a lawyer." I said, "No, sir, I am a lawyer. I've been at this prison before." He says, "I don't believe you're a lawyer." He made me go back to my car and get my bar card. And I was really insulted by it. But I got my bar card, I went back to him and said, "Look, here's my bar card. I want to see my client now." And then the man looked at me and says, "Okay, well, you're a lawyer, but you're going to have to get in that bathroom. I'm going to give you a strip search." I said, "No, sir, lawyers don't get strip search coming into this prison." He said, "You're coming into my prison, get in that bathroom." Couldn't get anybody to help me. So I went into the bathroom and subjected myself to this humiliating strip search. I came back out, and I was prepared to see my client. I said, "Well, I want to see my client now." He said, "Well, you got to go back there and sign the book." I said, "Lawyers don't have to sign that book. Come into my prison and go sign that book." So I did. And finally, he took me to the door, and he unlocked the door, and I was about to walk inside, and he grabbed me by the arm and said, wait, let me ask you something." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Did you see that truck out there with all those bumper stickers and flags?" I said, "Yeah, I saw that truck." He said, "I want you to know that that's my truck." Really provoked. I was sitting in the prison waiting for my client to come out. The client was somebody I hadn't met before, and the client came out, a young African-American man. He sat down, and the first thing his client said to me was, quote, "Did you bring me a chocolate milkshake?" And I thought to myself, this is the strangest day I've had. I said, "No, I didn't bring you a chocolate milkshake. I'm a lawyer. I'm here to represent you." I started asking my questions, but he wasn't paying any attention, and I realized he was hung up on his milkshake. And finally, I put my pen down and said, "Look, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you wanted me to bring you a chocolate milkshake. The next time I come, if they let me, I'll bring you a milkshake." And when I said that, this man smiled and smiled and smiled. He was terribly, terribly disabled. Horribly abused. He was in 29 foster homes by the time he was 10 years old. He began showing symptoms of bipolar disorder at 13 years of age, but he couldn't get medical care, so he started using crack cocaine. At 15, he was using heroin, he was addicted to heroin. At 16, he was schizophrenic. At 18, he was having psychotic episodes, and he was homeless. And at 19, in the midst of a psychotic episode, he committed an horrific crime. Stabbed someone to death. They arrested him and charged him with capital murder. They quickly convicted him and sentenced him to death. I got the record, and I went to the record, and I couldn't find the words mental health, mental illness, mental disease anywhere in that transcript. Terribly defective. One of the great challenges we have in this country is that we have a criminal justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Wealth, not culpability, shapes outcomes. When we started working on this man's case, we got some great experts involved, and I was feeling good about it. It was time to go to court, and all of our witnesses pulled together, and I got to the courthouse, and much to my dismay, I saw that guard, who I hadn't seen since, was the guard that had brought him from the prison to the courthouse. And he was just sitting in the corner staring at me. Well, we put on our case. We had 3 good days in court. Felt pretty good about the case. And I decided after a month later to go and see my client. I got in the car and drove down there, parked my car in the prison parking lot, and lo and behold, what do I see in the parking lot? But that truck. And I just didn't feel up to it that day. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to come back. 2 hours ago, I said, I'm just going to come back. I was walking back to my car and started hearing that song we used to sing when I was a little boy. We used to sing during the civil rights movement all the time. I started hearing that song when they used to sing, can't let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. And I realized I wasn't supposed to walk away. So I got my bar car, I said, I'm just going to go deal with this guy. And I walked up, and sure enough, he was standing in front of the prison. I said, hi, I'm here for a legal visit. Here's my bar card. And the man immediately said, hello, Mr. Stevenson. How are you? Kind of threw me. I said, I'm fine, thank you. I'll go in the bathroom and get ready for your search. He said, oh, Mr. Stevenson, you're not going to do that today. Kind of threw me. I said, all right, well, I'll go over here and sign the book. He said, Mr. Stevenson, I saw you coming, and I signed you in. Really threw me. He couldn't figure out what was going on. He walked over to the door, and I was trying to sort out what was happening, and I stood there as I watched this man try to unlock the door. There was a padlock and a key. When he got in front of the door, his hand started to shake, and he couldn't get the key and the lock. I was staring at him, figuring out what was going on. He couldn't get the key and the lock. He couldn't get the key. And finally, he got the key and the lock, and he unlocked the door, and he looked up at me, and his face was red. I thought he was about to cry, and I said, Mr. Stevenson, I have to say something. I just stared at him. He said, I want you to know I was in that courtroom during that hearing, and I was listening. He said, I want to tell you something. He said, I came up in the foster care system too. He said, I had it really bad. He said, I didn't think anybody had it as bad as I did, but I realized that maybe your client had it worse than I did. He said, I've been a very angry person my whole life. He said, I learned something in that courtroom. And then he looked at me and says, I want to say something to you, sir. He says, I want you to know that I think what you're doing is a good thing. And then he said, I hope you keep fighting for justice. I had never guessed it, never predicted it. Then he put his hand out and said, sir, can I please shake your hand? I shook his hand. I said, you know, I can't tell you what it means to me that you just said that. Thank you. I turned to go inside the prison. He grabbed me by the arm and said, wait. I got to tell you something else. I said, what's that? So I just want you to know I did something on the way back to the courthouse. What'd you do? Well, on the way back to the prison, I decided to take an exit. I took your client to a Wendy's, and I bought him a chocolate milkshake. It's a really silly story, but I say it to you because it speaks to you about how important it is that we stay hopeful about what we can do. That we stay hopeful about these systems that keep resisting us. That we stay hopeful about the people who don't want to believe the things we are telling them about the need for reform. Our hope is essential. And fourth and finally, I don't believe we can change the world. I don't believe we can actually create the kind of system that we all demand and need to see, unless we sometimes choose to do uncomfortable things. And I hate to say that, but it's true. We can't create justice by only doing what's comfortable and convenient. Right. Justice is created when people, good people, smart people, dedicated people, choose to do something uncomfortable. I've looked. I can't find anywhere in history where justice has come, where change and progress has come, where the disfavor had been lifted up when people only do what's comfortable and convenient. We've got to do the uncomfortable. And it's hard, because we are programmed to do what's comfortable. We like comfort. I like comfort. I'm not speaking against comfort. I'm not. I was giving a talk down in Mississippi. I got off the plane, and people came up to me and said, oh, Mr. Stevenson, we know all about you. We've read about you. We know what kind of person you are. We know what kind of work you do. And we're having our conference at the luxurious Doubletree Hotel. And we decided that you didn't want to stay at the luxurious Doubletree Hotel. So we asked one of the farmers if they would put you up at the bar. And I looked at them and said, what is wrong with you? Of course I want to stay at the luxurious Doubletree Hotel. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is sometimes we have to do uncomfortable things. I will tell you something. In Alabama, and Ray will bear witness to this, but we've had some difficult moments. The day we had last month, earlier this month, was glorious. But we've had some bad days too. Between 2009 and 2011, Alabama had the highest execution rate in the country. We had 17 executions in a 30-month time period. We don't have a public defender system. We don't have lawyers capable with people on death, but we have people literally dying for legal assistance. And me and my staff agreed to represent all the people who got execution dates who didn't have lawyers, but it was overwhelming. And I have all these beautiful young lawyers who were standing in trying to fight for people, and they were getting beat down, and finally I said, you know, you all take a break, I'm going to take this next case. And I got involved in a case of a man who was intellectually disabled and was scheduled to be executed in 30 days. And It pained me because it's clear that he was entitled to relief. The United States Supreme Court has held that you cannot execute the intellectually disabled, people with mental retardation. But the perversity of our system is that we made this misguided reprioritization. The lawyers didn't raise that issue at trial. They didn't raise it on appeal. They didn't present it in state post-conviction. They didn't present it in federal habeas corpus. And the great evil of our system right now is that somehow we persuaded ourselves that finality is more important than fairness. You look at the court's decisions and it's all about finality and procedure. Many of you spent decades longer in prison than you should have spent because we think that somehow finality matters more than fairness. And so we tried to present this evidence, but each court said too late, too late, too late. And finally, on the day of his execution, I got that horrible call from the United States Supreme Court about 45 minutes before the execution telling me that his court had denied his state motion. I called him up and gave him the heartbreaking news, and he was devastated. But he said he had something to say to me before I hung up. And one of his other challenges, in addition to being intellectually disabled, is that when he got anxious and when he got nervous, when he got overwhelmed, he had a hard time speaking. He had a hard time getting his words out. He would stutter. He had a very severe speech impediment. And even though he told me he had something to say to me, he couldn't really get his words out. And I was standing there holding the phone while this man was valiantly trying to talk, but he couldn't. And I will tell you, it was ripping my heart apart. The harder he tried, the more it just broke my heart. I was thinking about how human he was, and it was just overwhelming. And I remembered something I'd actually forgotten until that night. When I was about 9, my mother took me to church one Sunday, and I was there with my brother and my friends, and we were talking. There was a little skinny kid in church, and this boy wasn't saying anything. And I remember asking this boy his name or where he was from or something. And I remembered how that little boy also had a very severe speech impediment. And that boy tried to answer my question and he couldn't. And I did something really ignorant because I was 9 and I was foolish and I didn't know better. I laughed. And my mom saw me laughing at this little boy and she came over and gave me this look I'd never seen before. And grabbed me by the arm and pulled me aside and she pulled me over and she said, "Bryan, don't you ever laugh at somebody because they can't get their words out right. Don't you ever do that." I tried to defend myself. I said, "I'm sorry, Mom, I didn't know." She said, no, you know better than that." And then she said, "Now you go back over there and tell that little boy you're sorry." Took a step and she grabbed me by the arm. She said, "Wait, after you tell that little boy you're sorry, I want you to hug that little boy." So I rolled my eyes. I said, "Okay, Mom." I took a step and she grabbed me by the arm. She said, "Wait, after you hug that little boy, I want you to tell that little boy you love him." I said, "Mom, I can't go there." She gave me that look again. So I said, all right. So I went over to this little boy and I'd forgotten about this until the night of this execution. But what I remembered was going up to this boy and saying, "Look, man, you know, I'm sorry." And then I sort of lunged at him and gave him my little boy version of a man hug. And what I remembered was saying to that child, as insincerely as I possibly could, I said, "You know, I love you." And what I'd forgotten was how that little boy hugged me back and whispered flawlessly in my ear. He said, "I love you too." And I was thinking about that while this man was trying to get his words out, and the tears were just running down my face. And finally, he got his words out. He said, "Mr. Stevenson, I just want to thank you for representing me." He said, "I want to thank you for fighting for me." And the last thing he said was, "I love you for trying to save my life." Pulled him away and was executed. I hung up the phone and I thought to myself, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. It's too hard. It's too much. Just too overwhelming. I was thinking about how broken he was. And the question I had in my head was, what is it about our country? What is it about us that when we see brokenness, we just want to kill it? Why do we want to kill all the broken people? Why do we want to do that? We see brokenness in poverty, we see brokenness in this community, we just want to crush and exclude and throw it away. I said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, it's too hard. And that's when I had to have that conversation. I would realize that my life is filled with brokenness. All of my clients are broken. Broken by poverty, broken by racism, broken by disability, broken by disease. I worked in a broken system. I said, I don't want this anymore. And that's when I had to start asking those questions that you have to ask when you're going to do something big and important. I said, well, why have you been doing this, Bryan? And I realized something I'd never realized before. I realized that I don't do what I do because it's important. I don't do what I do because someone needs someone to do it. I don't do what I do because it's about advancing justice. I don't do what I do because I've been trained to do it. I don't do what I do because somebody has to do it. I don't do what I do because I feel like I've got skills to do it. I don't do what I do even to get to talk to wonderful people like you. I realized something that night I'd never realized before, and what I realized is that I do what I do because I'm broken too.
And the truth is that if you get proximate, if you try to change narratives, you have to stay hopeful, and if you do uncomfortable things, it will break you. But it's in brokenness that you understand the power of your will. It's in brokenness that you understand humanity. It's in brokenness that you understand justice. I'm not trying to save condemned people. I'm not trying to save children. I'm just trying to save myself, because I can't be whole and healthy while there are innocent people in jails and prisons. I can't be whole or healthy while we are executing and throwing away our children. I can't be whole or healthy while we are tolerating poverty and racism. Every exonerated person is broken. You can't do time for something you haven't done without it crushing and cracking and hurting you. But I'm here to tell you that if we change the world, it will be the broken who lead the way. It is the broken who understand what Jesus was saying when he said the first shall be last and the last shall be first. He was talking about the exonerated. When Dr. King said the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice, he was talking about the broken among us who are pulling and pushing it. I read all that literature in college. Dostoevsky said, truth crushed to earth shall rise again. He was talking about many of the people in this room. I believe really simple things. I believe that each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done, even the guilty. Even the guilty. I believe if somebody tells a lie, they're not just a liar. I think if somebody takes something that doesn't belong to them, they're not just a thief. I think even if you kill somebody, you're not just a killer. And our job is to talk about the other things these people are. I am persuaded that we cannot get to justice in this country without dealing with poverty, but I'm also persuaded that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. I think we talk too much about money. Yeah. Money, 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 money. I don't believe the opposite of poverty is wealth. I believe the opposite of poverty is justice. And we need to talk more about justice. What does justice require? And finally, I believe that we can't judge how we're doing in this country by how we treat the rich and the powerful and the privileged. I came up from Miami to all these beautiful places. But I'm not confused about how we have to measure how we do it. We can't judge ourselves by how we treat the rich and the powerful and the privileged. We have to judge ourselves by how we treat the poor, the incarcerated, and the condemned. Right. I am honored to be in this room with so many people who understand what it means to get proximate, to change narratives, to do hopeful things, and to do uncomfortable things. I'll end with this. I want you to believe and understand there's a different method system that we should govern ourselves by. And this is especially true for all of you exonerated people here. Don't measure yourself the way the world will teach you to measure yourself. Don't worry about how much money you have. Don't worry about how many people know and understand what you've gone through. Don't underestimate the power to create a metric system that's about you. I learned this from an older man. He was in a wheelchair. He came to a talk I was giving in a church, and he was sitting in the back of the church just staring at me. And he was looking at me real hard, and I couldn't figure out what the problem was, but he looked angry. And I kept giving him my talk, but he was sitting back there staring. And finally, at the end of the talk, people came up and were very nice, but he was still sitting in the back just staring. I kept looking at him. And finally, he got a little boy and wheeled him up to me down the middle of this church aisle. And he got in front of me, and he put his hand up, and he looked up at me, and he said, do you know what you're doing? And I couldn't figure out what to say. And he asked me again, he said, do you know what you're doing? And I stepped back, and I started mumbling something. I don't even remember what I said. And then he asked me one last time, he said, do you know what you're doing? And then this older man looked at me and says, I'm going to tell you what you're doing. And he looked at me and he says, you're beating the drum for justice. And I was so moved. He says, you're beating the drum for justice. And then he said, you keep beating the drum for justice. I was so moved. And then he grabbed me by my jacket. He said, come here, come here, come here. And he pulled me into his wheelchair. And he turned his head. He said, let me show you something. And he turned his head and he said, you see the scar I have behind my right ear? He said, I got that scar in Greene County, Alabama, trying to register people to vote in 1963. He turned his head and said, you see this cut I have down here at the bottom of my neck? He said, I got that cut in Philadelphia, Mississippi during Freedom Summer. He turned his head and he said, you see this dark spot? He said, that's my bruise. I got my bruise in Birmingham, Alabama during the Children's Crusade. He said, let me tell you something. He said, people look at me, they think I'm some old man sitting in a wheelchair covered with cuts and bruises and scars. He said, but let me tell you something. He said, these aren't my cuts. These aren't my bruises. These aren't my scars. He said, these are my medals of honor. In this room are exonerated people who have been bruised and cut and scarred. But I want you to know I honor each and every one of you who has held your hope, who has held your witness, who has held your voice to triumph and prevail. And what allows me to accept this award about champions of justice is to know that I am in a room filled with champions, filled with people who are cut, bruised, and scarred, but who honor us by being the witnesses and the advocates for change that we all need to see and feel. Let's change the world. Let's get proximate. Let's change narratives. Let's stay hopeful, and let's do uncomfortable things. I wish you all the very best. God bless you.
This is such an honor for me to be able to do this with you standing here, and Mr. Hinton, please join us. We have here this, just a token of our appreciation, really for everybody here, for you, for what you represent, for the inspiration that you give us, and I know we're all leaving here feeling that. Mr. Stevenson, the Innocence Network Champion of Justice Award.
That's amazing. The best money I put on a credit card.